when we look back on Christian history, the development of Christian thought, it's a surprising thing that until recent centuries, revelation was taken for granted. There's something of a parallel in Islam today. See, Islam is very committed to its faith, and the Quran and the teaching of Muhammad is basic, but Islam has not begun to reflect upon how that Quran was formed. We were a bit like that. We took for granted when the whole of Europe was Christian, at least in name and commitment. It mightn't be very deep, but for centuries, the whole of Europe was Christian. Therefore, revelation was just taken for granted as basic to life. But in modern times, in the 18th century, the Enlightenment movement, when people began to emerge in our Western civilization who did not accept the Christian faith and even challenged it, Christian thinkers are forced to reflect upon the process that produced our understanding of revelation. How did revelation take place? As we'll see, it's a fairly complex process. So the discussion has been a very broad discussion. It's taken a long time to clarify the issues, but now we benefit from the fact that those issues have been clarified and we have a far more realistic understanding of how revelation took place and a far more inspiring understanding of how revelation took place. The Second Vatican Council, one of its great gifts to the Church, is a summing up of all that's been acquired in this discussion, all that's been clarified. That is in the document on divine revelation, Dei Verbum. All that's been achieved in this long discussion, a very complex discussion, is summed up in a beautiful and clear way that helps us all. I've given you here some references to authors who tell you about that discussion. Dermot Lane is a very clear writer and a very enlightening writer, and he sums that up very well. But then you've got Richard McBrien, who are very detailed of this discussion about clarifying revelation. He calls revelation the self-disclosure of God. God revealing God's self. And then Gerald Collins gives a long study of the Constitution on Divine Revelation of Vatican II. So they're reference books that you might like to look at to understand more about this great discussion. But let's now look at what's been clarified in that discussion to make us understand revelation in a far more inspiring way. The best way to do this is to go back to the beginnings of our whole Judeo-Christian movement. See, something we Christians have to recover is a sense of fellowship with the Jewish people and their tradition. We're heirs to that. Jesus was a Jew. Jesus fulfilled all the hopes of Israel. So it's very important for us to understand the faith runs through in a continuity between Israel and the Christian church. So let's think of the moments that brought into existence this Judeo-Christian movement. Where did the power of this tradition begin? Began in Revelation. Come back to our analogy. People who enter into a marriage have a great moment of enlightenment, encouragement, a new vision, a new understanding of what life can mean. So something like that has happened between those whom God chose and God, and that was revelation. We can understand how powerful that moment was when we see the effect it's had in the world. The Jewish people, little people, not very significant among the histories of the world, but gradually their conviction that God had chosen them, the high ideals that they had of God's nature and God's purpose and God's goodness, God's justice and love, made them a force in the world. Their hopes in the end were taken up when the Son of God himself came and fulfilled those hopes. And again, another great moment of creativity, the Christian movement, changed the whole European world. So that moment, we now recognise, had various implications. We come back to the discussion of theologians now. We're looking at the reality of this movement and its effect. Obviously, the movement brought a propositional result, certain truths that we can express in propositions. That's what we've emphasised, isn't it? We've always said revelation was truth from God. But then the discussion also showed that this revelation came through historical events. God did not reveal by certain messages miraculously sent from heaven. God revealed all that God is and God's purpose in a meeting with people, in historical events. And in those historical events, people were enlightened by God to recognize that God was at work and God had a purpose and a promise for them. And then it was also very personal. Here's where the dynamism of the Judeo-Christian movement is so evident. This movement changed the world. It's the most powerful movement the world's ever seen, because people were caught up in a vision, a commitment, a certainty that they had the truth, what the world really was, what life really meant, where life was leading, the things that really mattered in life, how the challenge of life could be met. All these things were given to the world by the Judeo-Christian movement.